So we're about to talk about the funding. The beginning of today is going to focus on allocations and the money and the funding and how it is configured and how it comes down to you, what you can expect when receiving it, and kind of what happens on our end. And after we do all of that, then we'll move into some of the other grants, and then we're going to go into gaps at the very end of the day. So I'm going to turn it over to Sheree for a little while to talk about how she configures allocations.
Good morning. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Sheree Mosley. I am the application liaison for you guys, all districts, for Title I, Title I and B, Title II, Title IV, and Title V. And I'm also a program manager for about 7 districts. All right, so let's get started. I often get a lot of questions about allocations, especially after allocations have gone out. Districts may call asking questions about funding. I don't usually get a lot of questions about whether the allocations went up. But I will often get a lot of questions about allocations if they have decreased. And some districts, they want to know why this, why that, why did it go down? And so right here, this is some of the data that is used to determine your district's allocation. Student count, that's pretty much the amount of students that's enrolled in your districts. The pupils in poverty, the pupils in poverty numbers, that's what really drives a lot of your Title I funding. It is the students that receive, it was formerly your free reduced student count. Then you have your state per pupil expenditures, your census formula count. That information comes from the U.S. Department of Education when they are sending down your preliminary and final allocations to the state. And then your previous year's Title I allocation, that is used for Title IV only. Your Title IV allocations are derived from the previous year's Title I final allocation. And this is a chart that was shared with us at the National Convention. Just shows decrease in the allocation from the previous year. Again, this is another really important data set that drives your allocation. Anytime a district calls asking questions about why the allocation went down, this is one of the main points that I would direct a district to. Because if your allocation is decreased, then most likely nine times out of 10, your census data somehow went down, your student count went down, your pupils in poverty numbers went down. So this was just something that was shared with us where we anticipated the decrease in the Title I allocation. And you can see that South Carolina is in orange. So yeah, South Carolina did receive a decrease in their allocations. All right. The information that is used, this is information that is sent to the state from the U.S. Department of Education. Your Title I, the basis of your Title I allocation is based off of 4 federal pots of funding. You have your basic, concentration, targeted, and EFIG. If a district received a decrease in an allocation, this is the first place that I'm going to go. Before I check any census data, before I check any student count or pupils in poverty count, I will go back and check what your 4-pot funding look like. And like I said earlier, in most cases, if there's a decrease, this is where it started. It started in one of these pots, and this is usually the information that I'll share with said district who are asking questions about the decreases in the allocation. This right here is just an explanation on the basis of how districts qualify for the allocation. You have your basic grant eligibility, must have at least 10 formula children, and the number of those children must exceed the percent of LEA's population, 5 through 17. You have your concentration. it must first meet the basic grant eligibility in order for the district to qualify for that. And then you have your targeted and EFIG, the number formula of children accounted for basic, must, be at least 10 or equal, to the percent of the LEA's total population 5 through 17. All right, this is kind of like a breakdown for your hold harmless. A lot of times for districts that have received a decrease, this kind of helps to give you a basis of where the hold harmless will kind of hold the district. So that, say for instance, if your district received a decrease in its allocation, hold harmless kind of holds your district in place for the next year, so that you kind of, if there is a decrease in the total bottom line, you may have received some form of a decrease, but your allocation for your district will plummet. And so these are some of the criteria as far as hold harmless is concerned, whether it's 95%, 90%, or 85%. So if your district received a decrease in the current year, it will take into consideration what your district received the year before and kind of hold you. So it would be such a drastic impact on the district. And this is just a percentage, an example that is used and how formula children are used, the percentage of the formula children and where the hold harmless holds for each of the districts. And just give you an example of about 4 to 5 LEAs. These are not any districts in particular, but it's just an example to give you how that hold harmless works. As you can see, 2017 at the bottom and how it goes up and it holds the district again. So it wouldn't be such a drastic decrease for the district. And for the same for allocations. It just shows how the hold harmless holds those allocations in place. Again, it just has an example of 5 different LEAs and from FY25 and what the estimation of that allocation could be through FY26. All right, and I will turn it back over to Jennifer.
When we talk about Title I allocations, it is not a simplistic, just split it, between 77 districts. It is extremely complex. That spreadsheet is unbelievable. So, and if any of it gets off, it can really throw off the whole bag of fun. And so there's a lot of internal controls around working, especially those Title I and Title II allocations. So we're going to talk for a minute about claiming, expectations, deadlines, and all of that. Before I forget, I wrote myself a note to remind you that our grants accounting office at the department establishes when amendment cutoffs are for gaps. And so this year they extended it way beyond the typical. The last day to turn in gaps amendments is August 4th. And if you are new, please know that GEMS amendments come before GAPS amendments. GEMS amendments need to be approved before you go into GAPS to make your amendments to match what you put in GEMS. So if the GAPS amendment deadline is August 4th, when would you anticipate GEMS amendment deadlines to occur? No later than when? What would be appropriate? A third. The second would be great. So that I'm not killing myself, before doing GAPS on the 4th. So Sarah Wagers and I have to process everything in GAPS after I approve everything in GEMS. Okay? And I will be honest with you, after about 5 o'clock on August 4th, I cannot promise anything. Okay, because I go home. So please make sure that you understand the amendment deadlines for GEMS and GAPS as it is approaching. And understand that this is very different than the norm. I actually called and confirmed about 3 times. Are you sure? Because I put a GEMS announcement out to say when it was. Then I guess they decided to be even more kind and they extended it again. I called and said, are you sure? Before I send an update. So there's been a little bit of back and forth there, especially if you're finance, you probably noticed that. But very kind of them to take it on through August 4th. So keep that in mind. These are the new deadlines for submitting claims. These months used to have the number 15 behind them, right? Now it's the 30th, 30, 30, 30. So July 1 to September 30th, deadline for submitting claims is October 30th. In a minute, we're going to talk about the 15%. We used to look to see who met the 15% after the dust settled after November 15th. That will no longer be the case. Okay, we'll let the dust settle after October 30th, and then we'll have to look. So like that first week of November, we'll be looking instead of more like the end of November. So please keep that in mind for 15% tracking for Title I only. And then you see October 1st through December 31st, that deadline is January 30th. Reporting period January 1 to March 31st is April 30th. And then the August 15th, that's the only 15 that still holds. That one has been confirmed several times. Okay. This is different. These dates recently changed, so keep that in mind. Notice that it says the GAP system shuts down automatically on August the 15th. And we have no power over that automatic shutdown. So when you are submitting claims and expenditures and all of that, keep in mind that that system just closes down at the end of that day. Okay. Talk about transferability for just a moment. You'll hear me talk about this in brief this afternoon. There is a change with transferability. You can transfer funds between certain grants. We'll talk about that in each of the grants today as we kind of walk through which ones can you transfer when you're fooling with Title II, where can you take Title IV, which ones can go into REAP. We'll talk about all of those things. The change here is that if the district wanted to transfer funds in the past, our office had a form that you would fill out where we would have to approve the transfer about 30 days before you actually do it. Now we do not have to sign off on the approval. It's more you informing us. So in one of the resource slides that we have coming up, you'll see the new transfer form, and it will not have the line that says SCDE approved for me to sign off on that. It will just have signatures on your side. So Jennifer, how is that going to work? You will still send it in 30 days before you need to actually do it. And I would like to request that you put it in the related documents of GEMS and send it through that way. So it will come to your program manager. That person will check the funding amounts, make sure everything looks okay, and will pretty much just notify me that a transfer is happening. We actually have to report to the U.S. Department of Ed on how many of the funds and how much of the funds districts transfer every year. They want you all to have flexibility in that. And so we have to pull a report and actually send in the figures on how many districts transfer. So let's say we're talking about Title IV. That office wants to know how many of South Carolina's districts actually leave the funding in Title IV to be used for Title IV purposes versus sending it to REAP, for example, or sending it over to Title II, for example. So this is something that they're very interested in how you use the funding based on the needs of your district. So just know that those changes are there. Another question that I sometimes get is, well, Jennifer, does the funding move? No, funding does not move. So a way to think about that is it just takes on the allowability hat of where you want to send it. I will tell you though, if you want to send funding into Title I, like you want to put more money in Title I allowability hat, if you will, we do have to calculate the amount you send to Title I towards deciding what the 15% is. So you would take that total Title I allocation, whatever it is, excuse me, and then you add to that total the amount that you transfer to Title I, and then you multiply that to get the 15%. So it becomes more difficult to get down to the 15% the more money that you transfer into Title I. So although there are benefits to it, you also have to keep that 15% expectation in mind, right? But no money is going to move in gems and gaps. It's going to sit right there in the original place that it is to be claimed from gaps. Please also note that if you move money, well, not move money, but you understand what I mean at this point. If you transfer money, you have to deal with your private schools as well, understanding that you want to transfer, you have to get their feedback on that. So stakeholder meetings have to be held to discuss transferability and why it would benefit the district, right? Private schools should be included in that conversation as well. You would say, okay, we are looking to transfer some Title II funding into Title I, and these are the reasons why, and then you discuss how would that work for us. So those are some main things to keep in mind when it comes to transferring funds. Okay. We have some claiming expectations. I'm going to do this chart first. We have a nifty little chart for you. Program and finance need to have a copy of this chart. This is our expectation from our office for the grants that my team oversees. I don't have Title III listed up there, but for some of the grants that my team is working on, this is what we expect to see claiming wise. And we feel that this is a reasonable expectation based upon what is in each of those grants. Title I is established by law. You must expend the majority of the grant the first year of the grant for Title I. So you see a very large difference in the expectations per quarter for Title I versus the other grants. We talked for a minute about risk assessment. I will tell you that I have Sheree pull the report. Sometimes I'll pull it myself out of gaps just to see where are we standing. When we get into like quarter 3 of year 1 of a grant, if I pull a gaps report and I see that no claims have been made, I am concerned. That is a red flag to me. And here lately, I've been taking that one off Sheree's plate, and I've called myself or sent an email to say, please advise. I see no claims. What's going on? Simplistically put, when you turn in, let's say we're talking about Title I, for example, when you turn in these grant applications, and it's full of all these activities, that we say the children need, and no claims are being made. My mind wants to go to the auditing team to say, what's going on? Are they not doing the activities that's written in this plan? Sometimes I'll reach out and there'll be a reasonable justification, like I'm on year 2 of last year's grant for that activity. So sometimes, a conversation is held and I feel okay. Other times I'm like, no. Internal controls are not in place like they need to be. And I will walk across the room and I'll say, Barrett, who's the monitor for so-and-so district? And he'll tell me, and I'll walk up there and I'll say, I need you to write this down. This is something you need to keep in mind. It is important that we get the money off the table. Districts get really outdone when I say, okay, I'm going to give you some additional funds, and I can give it to you that like 3 months before it expires, or sometimes it's less time than that, because it takes a long time to work its way through our internal routing system. And then at the end, they're dealing with, work, extra work. And how does that happen and why does that happen? Because money is left on the table. I don't want to send it back to the U.S. Department of Ed, because then it looks like we don't need the funding. So, therefore, these claiming expectations are in place. And I know that this sounds harsh, and I am not at all a harsh person. I just want to make sure that what we say we're doing for the district, if we do a comprehensive needs assessment and we determine that these are the needs of these children, that these children are getting their needs met. That's what it is. It's not really about pushing papers and all that. Like, it should be making it down to the children. We talk about Title II. Are the teachers standing in front of those children every day, getting what they need to become more effective? Are the activities in that plan being held for those teachers? How many of you have been a teacher? So you understand, and you understand your span of influence. You remember how exciting it was as a teacher for somebody to say, oh, I'm going to send you to a conference. You remember? Oh man, I do. I go home and tell my husband, I say, they picked me. And I say, you get to do the children. I get even more excited. You know what else you get to do? You get to do the cooking. And you clean the litter box too. So exciting, right? They love an opportunity. And at the end of the day, you know what matters most? That person standing in front of those children. If I stand up here all day long today, I will go home absolutely exhausted because my body has forgotten what it's like to stand on a concrete floor all day long. Their body hadn't forgotten. They are doing what needs to be done for our children. We got to have the next doctor. We got to have the next lawyer, right? So let's use Title II to do our best for those educators. Sorry, that's a tangent of mine, but been there and done that, right? So for Title II, you see the claiming expectations are not quite as intense as Title I, and kind of less and less as you go through 4 and 5. You can do a lot of claiming in the second year of those grants. So what happens on our side to look at those expectations is that Sheree will run a report after the dust settles at the end of each of those claiming cycles. And she will look to see who's met the expectations in the following ways. So you see like the middle section there, the notification emails. So we have some examples of what that might look like. A, your district has not made any claims for this quarter. B, your district has failed to meet claiming criteria for this quarter. Or C, your district has met the claiming criteria for this quarter. So you might get a is met, don't see any, whatever it is. She also will disseminate this information to the rest of our team when it comes time for us to do our risk assessment as an agency. When we do that, we look at program, look at finance, and all of those things. Now, the Grants Accounting Office takes care of rating for claims that are submitted not in the appropriate quarter. Okay, and you do get a ding if it's not in the appropriate quarter. Okay, my team does not do that. We're looking at it like programmatically based upon the reports that we pull, but the Grants Accounting Office, who is processing claims, takes care of that physical look right there. Okay, so you as a federal programs director will get an email from Sheree for each of the grants that we oversee to say, all right, this is where we are with the expectations. Sometimes a district will email her ahead of time and say, hey, you're not going to see any for this quarter. And this is the reason why. Like a lot of mine are going to run summer school programs. And so for that quarter, there will be way many more claims than for the current quarter. If you do that, you won't get an email at all because she knows what's up. So if you know that's coming, if you want to email her directly, you're welcome to do that just to bring her into the knowledge. Okay, we'll talk about the 15% for just a minute. Currently, if you feel like your district will not expend 85% of the Title I grant, you can ask our office if your district is eligible to use a waiver. That's the use of it like once every 3 years. And we'll look to see when is the last time that the district requested it. And let's just say that the district is eligible because it hasn't requested one once every 3 years. Just because it's eligible does not always mean that it is approved. Okay, there is a form that has to be submitted and it will come to me, but then I have to forward it on to Jewel Stanley. She will read the justification for why the district is requesting to use the waiver instead of expending as expected. And then she and I will decide together, okay, is that justification reasonable? So it's more than just, yes, I can, I'm eligible, okay? It has to be a reasonable justification for doing so, okay? Need to try to expend it as best as you can. All right, so we'll look at some of the forms that are used around the 15%. Right now we have an EdFlex waiver that we have out on our website that if we get this waiver, it will change some of the ways that we do things. And one of those is this 15%. And the way that we go about the procedure for handling the 15% and requesting once every 3 years. It also will provide some flexibility in the Title IV grant in the content areas for that. And so it is out on our website for public comment right now. So if you're interested in reading that EdFlex waiver, you're welcome to do so. All right, this is the waiver request form that we have for asking, can I have my once in every 3 years opportunity to not meet that 15%. We have it linked there. It's also in our resource slide. This is a new one, but these days, if the 15% is not met and the district is not eligible to use that waiver, the superintendent is going to get a couple of different letters. The superintendent will have to sign off that he or she is aware that this situation has occurred. Because unfortunately, if the 15% is not met, the district is not eligible, and it's not approved, what happens then? At that point, we have to deobligate the amount that the district missed it by. We don't want to have to take money. Don't want to have to take money from the children, and the district, and the teachers, and all of that. We also don't want you to have to do the amount of work that is involved in the deobligation process. So what does that look like, Jennifer? If we have to deobligate funding, that means we run a GAN to where the amount we're taking back is subtracted off the total. So the superintendent's going to get a cover letter explaining what's going on and the new GAN, the amended GAN. And then once that is approved and has Ellen's signature, then I can send it out to the district, their finance person. Then we go into the GEMS system. We subtract off the amount in GEMS, which causes an amendment to begin for the grant in GEMS. And you have to come in and you have to take it from, most of the time you're taking it from where it should have been expended, right? So sometimes we have a conversation with federal programs directors. We'll say, we got a school, Rhodes Elementary, just will not spend their money. Can you help us in this area? We can partner with you to help get that done, right? Sometimes you might have a principal that needs a little more assistance than other principals. So we can partner in doing that, but that creates a GEMS amendment where you have to go in, figure out how to reduce the funding back down to the amount that you then have. Then you go in gaps. You have to do the same thing in gaps. And then everything has to match. So it's a lot of work happening on all fronts for the obligation to occur. So keep that claiming expectation in mind for Title I. Okay, now we'll talk about the process for final allocation. So I'm going to talk about an ideal timeline. Okay, I get tripped out. I shouldn't say that, say it in that way. Every year I start getting emails. When we're going to get final allocations? Here's the ideal timeline. In the perfect world, this is when you can expect it. You don't have to ask me every year. I love you. I will answer you. But I'm telling you today, here it is. Print it out. Put it beside your computer. This is what I'm going to do for you if I can. I will say that I am very proud thus far. We have already gotten our GANs. July 1, they started rolling in. And I was a little concerned about some of the transition this year, but they have started rolling in. For us, when we talk about a GAN and us receiving a GAN from the U.S. Department of Ed, we get a partial GAN July 1st for Title I and Title II. So they give us partial of the money. And then later on in the fall, in October-ish, we get the full GAN for Title I and Title II. Title 4, 5, and N and D is different. July 1st, we get the full game. We get the full amount. Title 4 has been very interesting the last few years. They don't typically change the total allocation between preliminary and final. So Title 4, you might not even have to edit the GEMS plan in the fall, except for indirect costs when we update that. It tends to be the same. REAP and N&D, we give out in the fall, so you're not working a preliminary plan then. So this is what you can expect to happen around final allocation time. We will get our full GAN for Title I and Title II around the first week of October, and we start recalculating the district allocations. So Sheree gets started. Sheree's been doing this for how many years now? 6, 7? So she's pretty quick these days if she's not waiting on data sets from different entities. It moves pretty quickly. And so she'll start recalculating. And she knows that Jennifer really wants to tell the districts how much they're going to get before we go to SCADA. And why is that? Yeah, because y'all can catch me in the hall, hey. 77 times I'm gonna say, hey. So if we can get it out, we try to by email notification. So if you are new, by email notification, it will come out and it will contain a lot of information that I don't typically just put on a GEMS announcement. So another good reason to make sure your contact information is up to date if you are new in DIMS and in GEMS, so that you can get that information sent to you. Okay, so we calculate and we try to go ahead and say how much it's going to be via email. And then Sarah Wagers is working as soon as Sheree finishes the allocations. She pretty much has the GAN language already done at that point, and then she drops in the figures that Sheree gives to her, and then we drop it into ART. And it's routing in our agency's internal routing system while we're at SCADA, routing. So that when we come back, it's en route, and we're waiting. Okay, so now we're in November. You can see ideally what's going on. Hopefully by then it has come out of ART and it's got Ellen's pretty signature on it and it's ready to give to your superintendent. At that point, when it comes out of ART, Gail Knight, she was here a while ago, she sends it out to the superintendent, and I have asked her to tag in the federal programs person so that you will know, okay, the GANs, multiple, have gone to the superintendent. Superintendent needs to get it signed and it needs to come back. Why does it need to come back? It needs to come back because I do not approve GAPS budgets until I have the signed GANs on file. Okay? You want to put it in GAPS, you can budget it in GAPS. That's fine, but it's going to sit until I get the GAN. Okay? So that's kind of what you can expect. The 3rd week of November, the 4th week of November, you can start working in GEMS, making your changes based on the final numbers, start submitting, we start reading. So GEMS gets approved at the program manager level. That's a 2-step approval. Program manager reviews, then it comes to me and then I review behind them. Once all of that is approved, then you can budget in GAPS. Start putting your budgets in GAPS. And then I will go in and approve gaps. And then you can do what? Make some claims, right? Make some claims. So this is the ideal timeline. Okay, and then it's scripted out in a different way. I wrote it in 2 different ways so that you can have it as a reference. It says the same thing. Okay, something else to keep in mind. At final allocation time, when we tweak those figures for Title I, Title II, and Title IV, Sheree will go in and she will update the indirect cost rate at that point. So it'll go from what it is sitting at right now at preliminary to your newly negotiated rate in the fall. She'll drop that in and it's going to go into revision started. So you can come in and make changes for that. Now for Title IV, if the allocation didn't change, that's fine. It's still going to move into revision started because why? Yeah, indirect cost rate changed. So it's going to move into revision started and it will have to be tweaked. At that point, REAP will be put in. We'll give you a deadline for REAP. N&D will be put in. We'll give you a deadline for N&D. Everything is in the system at that point. We no longer go back into the previous year's grant and update the indirect cost rate. So let's just say we're talking about the 27 grants. We will update the 27 grants, but we're not going back into 26. Okay, so your finance department, I hate to say you're on your own for working with the older grant because we're not going to update the older grant. Okay, if your finance person needs to talk about that, talk about how to work through that, they can call Sarah Wagers or myself. We can kind of talk them through how to handle that. You're on your own for tracking in that old grant. Okay. Now we'll put on our programmatic hat for just a minute. This is the assignments or program manager assignments. So if you're curious about who has who, this is it. Now as you're looking at it, you're like, oh my goodness.
Hello, everyone. For those of you who I have not met, my name is Jewel Stanley. I'm the director for the Office of Federal and State Accountability. I've got a couple of announcements and we're going to switch up how we're doing things for the remainder of the day. So if you'll just bear with us for just a little bit. First of all, the power is out, obviously here, the Department of Ed and down Charleston Highway. There has been a main power line that has fallen. So I know that they're going to be redirecting traffic and everything when we leave this facility. What we're going to try to do is just get through a few more bits of information for you today. And when we finish that, you're going to lunch. And on home, we will try to record the rest of the information for you and provide you with a link so you'll have that information for later. We debated whether or not to break for lunch, come back in, hoping that the power would be working, but it's just not a good use of your time. So we're going to try to make the best of what we have right now. Jennifer's going to come back and go through some of the slides that she has printed. I know you have access to those slides as well, but we'll try to get through some of this information in just a little bit. While I still have the mic, I do want to bring your attention to the fact that the South Carolina Department of Ed has written an EdFlex waiver, and that waiver is currently on the South Carolina Department of Ed's homepage. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll be able to see that waiver. I don't know whether you have access to Wi-Fi on your personal hotspots not to see it. But a bit of homework that I would like to give all of you is to take a moment or two and read through the EdFlex waivers. If you have any comments, there are directions on that landing page that if you have comments that you could send those to me. I will be collecting all comments. If there's a need to revise our EdFlex waiver based upon the comments that we receive, I will do that. But the public comment period is open until the 22nd of this month. And then after that, I will be sending our EdFlex waiver to the U.S. Department of Ed for them to approve. And so what is included in that EdFlex waiver? One piece is the 15% carryover limitation. You may have heard Jennifer talk about that earlier, where you had to get your Title I allocation or funding, down to 15% in that first year. And if you didn't make it, usually what would happen if you didn't have a waiver in place, that money would be returned to the Department of Ed and it would be redistributed to other districts. You have a once in a 3-year time frame for that waiver normally. What the request is that we have for the U.S. Department of Ed is to give South Carolina the ability to grant you another waiver should you need one within that 3-year time frame. Okay, so that's one piece. The second ask in the EdFlex waiver is the ability to forego the 3 categories in Title IV as far as the percentages that you could spend in each one of those pots for well-rounded education, technology, and safe and healthy schools. So if you would, like I said, just read through that. If you have any comment, please don't hesitate to send those to me, good or bad. It does not matter. I would like to have some comments from you all as I present that EdFlex waiver to the U.S. Department of Ed, hopefully next week, based upon your comments. Was there anything else I'm forgetting to mention? Oh, Jennifer wants me to talk about the one plan with you all. Currently, we're working in GEMS, as you all know, and we're also working in GAPS in order for you to submit all that you need for your grants, right? So in addition to that, the districts are responsible for doing district strategic school renewal plans, gifted and talented plans, you name it. There are a lot of them out there, right? And along with those plans, you have needs assessments and other data reporting. We are trying to, we're not trying to, we are going to have a unified application. We're working with various groups to have that happen. We're doing some reorganization with the work that we do in the agency. We want to get to the point where you're submitting one comprehensive needs assessment, no matter what it is that your district is working on. There should be one comprehensive needs assessment instead of multiples, right? And then within that unified application, we want to make sure that we're inputting the data for you with the data sets that we already have. Well, I ask you for report card data when we already have it, right? So that some of the information that we will have will be self-populated in this new unified application. One feature that we want to see happen Jennifer talked about the ability for districts to have transferability of funds between grants. Instead of saying you're just going to act like the funds in Title IV are treated as Title I, you'll actually be able to move that $20,000 out of the Title IV allocation into your Title I and see the budgeting there. So those are some of the things that we want to see in this new application. What's happening now, we are working to get a pilot started in January of 27, simultaneously putting out an RFP for the actual unified application. Those districts who are working in the pilot are going to be working in GEMS right now for that pilot. And they'll just have a few more features turned on in GEMS that you normally do not see, to kind of give us an idea of what some of these features will look like when we move into the new unified application. So our hope is for the 28 school year, 28-29 school year, everyone will be in the brand new unified application. Okay? Fingers crossed, everything works out the way that it's supposed to, and that could be just a wonderful thing that will allow me to go sit on my porch, sip coffee, and watch the squirrels play every morning. So we hope that we'll be able to get all of that done. There's a lot of work. We meet weekly to try to get some of the bugs worked out with what we want to do. As the work becomes a little more intense, you will be pulled in and asked questions, and you will be given more updates. So just wanted to let you know we're just really in the strong planning phase right now. Okay, I think that's all I have. I'll turn it over to you, Jennifer, so you can continue.
Thank you, Jewel. Would you mind pulling up your slides on your computer? I have mine printed out. We're going to do just a little bit more, and then I know it's getting warm, so I'll dismiss you shortly. Not everybody, not every district is a recipient of REAP and N&D. So when we record those later, we can, those of you that are recipients of those grants, you can go in and pull up those and listen for Title II and Title IV. That is everybody, so you'll have access to that later. And then the one on gaps, everybody will have access to it as well. So you can go back to that little chart, that little nifty chart where the program managers are and the listings of districts, where I said, whoop, and the power went out. She said, do it again, maybe come back on. So that's where we'll pick up. We'll do just a little bit more, then I'll dismiss you because it's getting warm. Okay, so as you, wow. The power of the tongue, the power in our words. Maybe the air will keep back on.
Still got the clicker over there. I can get another.
Well, okay. Karen? Okay. Okay, so as you look at this, you may be thinking, well, that looks different from one person to the next. And why is that? I take you back to yesterday's conversation when I was talking about specialty areas per ed associate. So you will notice that, well, we'll talk about mine first. I have to read every claim. at the second level. Okay, that's an internal control on our side. And so I have less as a program manager because I'm looking at all of them as they come across. And we're talking about Title I, II, IV, V, and N and D. So this time of the year is really busy. There's a lot of reading. Most of the time, this time of the year, I go back to the eye doctor and get a change in prescription because there is so much reading. So you can see the districts that I am the program manager for. And so what does that look like? That will look like after I do the first read, then I will have an ed associate, one of the other ladies on the team with me, to read behind me. So for those districts, they get a second level read as well. So if you are Kershaw, Lawrence 55, Richland 1, or Spartanburg 1, you might hear from somebody else on the team with some feedback if they're reading behind me. Okay, so it looks a little bit different for those particular districts for that reason. We're still trying to hold that internal control. Sheree is working on allocations. That is very time consuming. And so that's why you see a difference in hers. And then Sarah, she helps with our administrative budgets for our office, as well as running all the mini GANs. And do you know that at this point, there is always a GAN in ART? There is always money running in ART, whether it is additional funds, regular funds, deobligated funds. Bless her heart, there's a lot of legal documentation going on there. So that's why you kind of see differences there. Makisha's is a little bit lighter because she's the state coordinator for N&D. She and I are reading N&D. So the other ed associates are not reading neglected and delinquent, just she and I. So those are your program managers per district. So if you are brand new, you know who to see today. We all have a little tag on so that you can find us and have some conversations, especially if you are new. We are here to support you. And here's our resource slide that I spoke about earlier that has all those forms we went through so that you can have access to that. All right, we'll have a little bit of table talk, okay? At your table, I would like for you to talk about the answers to the first two questions. And we'll give you a couple of minutes and then we'll have some share out, okay? What are the answers to the first two questions?
All right, so I'm hoping to give you some helpful information as it comes to Title II. I'm here again to tell you how we review Title II. I will get into some logistics with you. So Title II can be transferred. And as Jennifer has already spoken about, our transfer forms are a little bit different this year. You no longer need to send it ahead of time to us for approval. And they are linked within all of our GEMS applications, the form is. So if you were transferring funds from Title II to a different title, you just need to tell us what title it is going to, how much you're transferring out of your total allocation, and then give us a brief description of how you're going to use those funds in the newly transferred title. And then you're going to attach your transfer form filled out in your related documents. Helpful hint, when final allocations come out, your transfer may change because your allocation may have changed. And if you're transferring all of it, then you're going to need to redo your form and re-upload it in your related documents before submitting your final allocation. So on the next page. Oh. All right. Another use of funds for Title II is class size reduction. We talked a little bit about class size reduction yesterday and about meeting our own supplement amounts plan. This goes into effect for this as well. So with class size reduction, we have a page for that within GEMS. You're going to tell us the teacher, you're going to give me their certificate number. And you're gonna tell me what school they're at. This helps me look them up in the database. Because we are looking to make sure that they are properly certified, because anytime that we're spending federal money on teachers, they need to make sure that they are properly certified. And we kind of pushed back on this a little bit last year. So you may have gotten questions from your program manager about some of the positions that you're filling, or if we didn't get all the information from you. We're just trying to cover your bases and cover ours as well. The state levels for class size reduction, we talked about a little bit yesterday. So for K through 3, it's 30-1. For 4 to 6, it is also 30-1 for ELA and math. But for the other subjects, it's 35-1. And then for 7 to 12, it's 35-1. So your ratios should be within those numbers to be able to fund a class size reduction teacher. On this page, we ask for you to give us the grade levels so we can match it up to the state ratios, what subjects they'll be teaching. And then this part gets tricky sometimes. So I need to know how many total students there are in that grade level. What's your enrollment for that grade level? And then how many teachers I'm allocating to that grade level that are being paid for with state funds before I'm adding a class size reduction teacher. And then I'm going to do the math. So I'm going to take your total number of teachers or students divided by the number of teachers that you're funding with state funds, and it should be within that 30-1, 35-1 ratio. Then you're going to tell me what the class size, so you'll tell me what the class size before adding the teachers are, and then you're going to tell me what the class size would be after I add the teachers. So it's going to be that total number, the number of teachers that are paid for with state funds plus your class size reduction teacher. Divide that all together and that will give us that final number. So just check your math on this. We will send it back if the math is not correct. Because this is a federal document, guys. So everything needs to be accurate. That's right. You're looking at grade level before. Good question. I'm just looking to make sure. The question was, you're looking at the 135A. So you're looking at the grade level before. So if you're funding a 4th grade teacher, you're going to be using the numbers from 3rd grade. Okay, for the 135A year before. All right, another page that you have within GEMS is stakeholder participation. And we're looking to see that you have a wide variety of stakeholders that are coming to the table to give input on your Title II plan. So we're looking for district office people, your private schools, teachers. I want to see some administrative levels. Parents would be awesome. So just make sure that you're covering a wide variety of people to get stakeholder participation. And then at the bottom of that page is the distribution of funds. So you just need to tell me how you're choosing to distribute your Title II funds. So if you're a charter district, you may be selecting to send it to all your schools. If you are just going with your highest Title I schools, maybe that's the indicator that you use. Some other ones are ones they're CSI schools, TSI schools, or they're identified as persistently dangerous schools. And so you can choose more than one, obviously, but we just need to know what's your identified need for sending out those funds. All right, once we get into the budget, we're looking for some of the same things. And for tax, I'm looking at your budget codes to see if they align with what they should be coded. Sometimes we'll ask questions about that. Are you sure this is the right budget code for this activity? And we don't question things, to be nosy and intrusive. We question things so that we make sure that things are right the first time, because we do get a lot of amendments where budget codes get changed. So we're just trying to help you out to kind of decrease that amendment process. So there is allowable use of funds guidance for Title II, and it's linked at the back of this presentation for you. So if you're funding, and these are just two different things. So the top one just says salaries for 21 class size reduction teachers, which is just fine, because I've got all your documentation where? Back on the class size reduction page, right? And this one says, and properly certified, and they give me their name. 1.0 to reduce the first grade class size at Scranton Elementary Steve Academy from 1 to 25 to 1 to 18, which is perfectly fine too. This is your documentation. As long as we have the information we need to be able to approve either one of these. We talked about PD yesterday. Yep, we need a PD tracker in this one too, especially in Title II, right? Because Title II is all about those teachers. And this is where you see a lot of PD being funded out of. So we're looking for the same things. We just need to know some general information. What conferences are you going to? Where's that conference going to be held? What's the general budget for the conference? Who's going to the conference? What are they hoping to glean from the conference? And all of this just helps you make sure that what your teachers are requesting to go to is fully beneficial to improve academic achievement, right? So it's just an extra step for you, as well as your schools. You know, if your schools are having to put this much effort into it, they're kind of stepping back and going, okay, we really need to go to all these conferences. Because we want to see, you know, PD is important, but we need to make sure that it's really working towards the goals that they're working for the district and for the schools. And the last thing I have to share with you is about related documents. So within your related documents, we're looking for your stakeholder meeting notes. If you have a position that's being funded out of Title II, so if you're funding an instructional coach that's working with your teachers to provide specific PD and to work with them on interpreting data and helping them set up their reading groups and provide their data and doing all the stuff with the teachers, then we like to see a job description and make sure that everything that position is doing truly aligns with Title II. Because it's real easy for a position to slip in, well, I'm gonna pull a small group. If I'm pulling a small group, that portion of that position cannot be paid for out of Title II. Title II can only be used to fund positions that are working with teachers, not with students. So we may ask for a job description if you have some positions in there. If you've got stipends, as Jennifer mentioned earlier, you can do stipends for retention, for there's teachers, your strategic staffing. You can do stipends for mentoring. You can do stipends for attending professional development. You can do stipends for, well, outside of contracted hours, professional development. You can do stipends for recruitment. So maybe I have a hard to fill position. I can do a stipend for that. Maybe I have a school that's really, really, really rural and we're struggling to get staff to do a stipend. Our suggestion, and we can't require you to do this, but our strong suggestion to you is that you have some kind of policy in place that lays out clearly who's getting the stipends, why, what are the qualifications, and that covers you. Because when Mary Jo down the road wants to know why she didn't get a stipend when she was hired 2 years ago, but now you're giving out stipends for the same position she holds, like you need to have that justification blocked. So that's something that you could upload. And if we see stipends, we usually just ask, do you have a policy in place? We're not looking for you to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna upload it here, you know, let me share it with you, whatever. We just want to want you to think about. We're just giving you something to ponder about, to cover yourself. And then you can upload any non-competitive procurement forms, but I'm gonna step in right now and tell you, like, we should receive very few non-competitive procurement forms. Like, we should be competing almost everything. And that's literally just gathering, 3 quotes, right? Very few things actually fit in that non-competitive procurement section. Questions about gyms in Title II. Questions about Title II. Here are some resources for you all. They did release some new non-regulatory guidance last year as well. So that's linked here for you. And they have 2 different non-regulatory guidance updates. So one is on recruitment, retention, and professional learning. The other one is on diverse educator workforce and strengthening teaching and learning. And then we have linked to our state and district use of Title II funds. If you start perusing your documents and decide you have other questions, or if you have something really super innovative that you're thinking about doing for Title II, reach out to your program manager. They will be glad to talk through those things with you. And that's what we're here for all the time. So if you've got something new that's coming to the table in a plan, and you want to make sure it's tight before submitting the plan, then please reach out to your program manager and talk to them about it first. We're all about helping you get the plan sent through once. So, because we know that if we have to send something back, it's got to go back to all those people. And so we're trying to help you out. Another thing is that sometimes if it's just a quick clarifying question, we'll just put something in the history log instead of sending it back to you. That way we can just have some communication about it. Questions, comments, anything good to the group? Y'all are really excited today. It is 11:04. You have an hour and a half. So we will see you at 11:05. We will see you at 12:35.
Welcome back. I hope you all found somewhere to go to lunch with power. I think we had too many issues down Charleston Highway, so we were fortunate. I know you're really excited that the power came back on and we could be here this afternoon to talk about Title IV. I'm as excited as I am to be here. But I'm Martha Walker. I see a lot of familiar faces out here. I see some new faces, so this will be a good refresher for our veterans and some great information for our new Title IV people to take back to your districts. We're just going to discuss some general Title IV information that you need, as we all know that the Title IV application will be due soon, August 31st. So, Title IV stands for Enhancing Student Support and Student Enrichment. So student support and academic achievement under Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. And the purpose of Title IV is to enhance academic achievement by increasing the capacity to provide students with a well-rounded education, to improve school conditions for student learning, that safe and healthy category, to improve the use of technology to enhance academic achievement and digital literacy. So those 3 content areas that we're all, or most of us, are familiar with. So the program components include the well-rounded bucket, the safe and healthy students bucket, and the effective use of technology. So under well-rounded, this is a very flexible area. You can fit in there arts education, maybe adding in advanced learning courses, advanced courses, maybe things like American history, more civics courses, that sort of thing, college and career counseling, or foreign language expansion, gifted education expansion, physical education, curriculum, professional development for your teachers, social and emotional learning can also fit in this content area, STEM and STEAM, and a lot more. You know, I have had the privilege to present nationally about Title IV, and most recently, we shared at the Title IV T4PA Center through the U.S. Department of Ed. I presented with Spartanburg 7 and Greenville, and I've also had Lexington and Karen Cook at the ESSA Academy. So we've got some really great things going on in Title IV. It is a very flexible grant. And these ladies shared, specifically Spartanburg 7, they shared an activity where, you know, it would fit in well-rounded education and safe and healthy. They incorporated an esports team, and it was an after-school club, and they really saw gains in attendance and grades with some high needs students of theirs. And Karen shared, I think it was the behavior interventionist, and looking at evaluation and determining whether or not, you know, that was working for them. Same with Greenville. So there's a lot of great things that are happening within Title IV. So the next category is safe and healthy. This can include, you know, your community partnerships. If you want to bring in professional development like PBIS or conscious discipline, dropout prevention, mental health services and counseling, parent and family engagement, any kind of professional development that's tied to safe and healthy, PBIS, SEL programs, again, the PE, activity and wellness programs, restorative justice. So there's a lot of different things that you can pull in. And I will say within our Title IV program across our districts, mental health counselors, I see it as a lot across our plans. You know, funding and partnering with mental health organizations in your districts. And then the last category is effective use of technology. And this isn't for buying technology. This is providing the PD to help teachers effectively use technology. So maybe incorporating things like blended learning, flipped classrooms, independent study. But then, of course, you know, the technology integration PD. And then, you know, there is the technology infrastructure. You can purchase devices and equipment that you need, but there is a 15% cap on the amount of funding you can use within that category on things like devices. We'll get into that a little more for the new ones in here. So with the categories, you must have at least 20% in your well-rounded bucket, 20% in your safe and healthy. And then there's no requirement for how much you put in the effective use of technology bucket, but no more than 15% of what you do allocate in that bucket can be spent on infrastructure. And when you're meeting with your stakeholders, there is this graphic that's helpful to explain the different buckets. So you'll see where well-rounded at least 20 with some ideas for what you could spend within that category. The safe and healthy with at least 20%, some ideas here on how you can spend that funding. And then technology, which would then be no more than 60% if you've met those minimums in the other categories. And here, more information on no more than 15% of this portion can be used to fund technological infrastructure, which would be those devices, equipment, software applications, platforms, digital instructional resources, or other one-time IT purchases. Now, a lot of times, districts, you may need something to carry out a program in well-rounded or safe and healthy. So if there is some sort of software or device or something you need to be able to implement a well-rounded or safe and healthy program, you could put that item in one of the other buckets with that program. So would it count? It will only count towards the 15% within the effective use of technology bucket. But the main thing too to remember is that effective use of technology is that, right? Professional development to help teachers learn how to use technology better within their classroom. So this is what it would look like if you received $60,000 in Title IV. You might put $15,000 in well-rounded. You may have $20,000 in safe and healthy. You've met your minimums there. And then you have $25,000, which we typically don't see this bucket, but 25,000 or more in it. But for this example, you would want to spend $21,250 of that $25,000 on PD, technology PD. And then you would not want to spend any more than $3,750 on technology infrastructure. So just a visual to help break it down. So planning for your Title IV needs assessment, of course, the first step is going to be to determine activities based on your identified needs, meeting with your stakeholders, and then writing those high-quality objectives and outcomes. And one way to demonstrate that you've done this is through your logic models, which we'll get into. And then you'll, of course, want to continuously monitor and evaluate your objectives, and then publicly report your outcomes to the state. And that comes through that survey that we send out typically in December. And I'll touch on that at the end here. Oh, Leslie's going to share some GEMS tips and what we look for with our checklist for Title IV.
I'm back. All right, so this is your needs assessment section of GEMS in your Title IV application. And so we just ask, you are required to complete a needs assessment for Title IV every 3 years, as well as in your logic model can follow that 3-year cycle as well. So some people turn in a needs assessment and a logic model, but as long as your logic model includes all the data and information that we need, that's sufficient as well. So all that we ask for on this page is the date that you've done an assessment to drive the needs that you need in each category, and what assessment or needs assessment you're using as your data source, and then for each different category. And then at the bottom, you're just kind of telling us what the results of the needs assessment were. So here's our data, this is the sources we used, this is when the assessment was done, and then at the bottom, this is what we discovered we need to use our well-rounded money for based on these needs, and et cetera.
You know when ours is due. When you say it's every 3 years, like.
I mean, and your district may decide to do more than every 3 years. Yeah, so it's, I mean, we have some districts in here that do like 3-year goals. So, I mean, it's.
She was asking, how often are you expected to update your needs assessment and logic model? So we know some districts have those 3-year goals, and that's fine, but we would like to see where you have reflected and analyzed, your outcomes to determine if it's working and if you need to make any mid-year or, second-year changes or anything like that. But the goals can stay the same, but yes, we would want you to look at the data behind what you're doing. Okay, so in talking about your needs assessment, you would need to make sure that you establish that planning team like you do with your other grants, and that would be having students at the table, parents and families, teachers and support staff, school counselors, school administrators, private school administrators, community stakeholders, and community organizations to determine your needs.
Okay. The next page within your GEMS application is your program administration page. So when we're looking at this page, we are looking that you have covered the bases with your stakeholders. You have a wide variety of stakeholders coming to the table. And you just simply check off the different categories. And then you upload your documentation. So it's gonna be, your planning team meetings, the notes from that, sign-in sheets, et cetera.
So when you're determining your needs, or maybe you are evaluating your logic models, we pulled some data sources that you can look at for each category or each content area. So under well-rounded, you could look at things like tracking enrollment and offerings, course offerings and music, art, world languages or STEMs, and AP courses and IB. You can pull graduation rates, test scores, and access for students to advance coursework to determine what your needs are in that area. You can look at school climate surveys, student interest surveys, and then lastly, feedback from parent nights or advisory councils. Under safe and healthy, you can look at maybe some attendance data, monitor that chronic absenteeism and tardiness, PBIS, maybe some discipline dashboards, track incidents and referrals. You can look at maybe your after-school summer partner participation logs and assess out-of-school support. And then lastly here, school-based service providers and looking at your needs with nurses, social workers, and counselors and track their caseloads and needs. And then with effective use of technology, maybe look at teacher tech integration surveys, ed tech tool usage data, professional development, attendance participation, and then staff tech skills, self-assessments, tech literacy assessments, and then parent digital access and literacy surveys to determine what your needs are within your district.
Right, so the next page in GEMS is your program details page. This is the meat and potatoes of your Title IV plan. This is that pretty page that we refer to for your LEA set-asides page. So this is where we have a quick glance at what you were doing within your budget. So this page has magical GEMS powers. It goes ahead and calculates what that 20% is for you. It tells you what the minimum of your allocation is that you need to spend it safe and healthy as well as well-rounded. And then it allows you to put in, we just ask for you to put in the total that you're spending in each category, which you tag those within your budget. And then give us a description of what you're doing in each of those different categories. And so, like I said, don't just tell me that you're seeing my budget details. I need for you to give me a little bit more information so I can at a glance see what you are doing here. And then if we need to pull reports, we can pull it easily from this page. The second thing is under effective use of technology, the big box that's listed there, that's for your professional development. If you are choosing to pay for some infrastructure, which also includes software, then that you're going to have to click that little plus button to expand that infrastructure box and go ahead and enter your information there. Now, I did say that it includes software, but there are ways to cross-cut some things. So if you're purchasing software to track attendance, then I can put that under safe and healthy. Or if I'm purchasing software for an arts program, I can put that under well-rounded. So if you have questions about that and need some help working around how to get some software into your plan, then reach out to your program manager and we'll be strategic with you. The other thing I want to point out is there's a section there for your administrative costs. So if you are working on Title IV and you're being paid out of federal funds, then you should have a portion of your salary here in your Title IV plan. And I believe there's a 4%, 2%. There's a 2% cap here. So you can only set aside 2% of your allocation on your salary here in Title IV. And then the last thing is if you're choosing to take indirect costs.
Yeah, so, this won't flag it, or doesn't flag it for you, Leslie, if they move forward. I think it'll give you like a warning message before you move forward to make sure, are you sure your grant does not include technology infrastructure? But again, you know the 15%, and then just type what you're putting, you're using for infrastructure. But the main thing here is just to keep in mind that this bucket of funds is really for technology PD. That's the true intent of this content area. Yeah, you don't have to have anything there. What we like to see is that professional development. You don't have to have infrastructure. Not required. Okay. All right, so analyzing your data to identify your needs. We gave you some examples. So reviewing those data categories, look for those patterns and trends, and compare, the current versus prior year data to identify increases or decreases or consistencies to determine what's working, what isn't working. Ask those key questions. Where are the funds most effective? Are we meeting our goals? So it's that constant reflection on your logic models, so the goals you're setting and the outcomes that what you're purchasing produces. So identify key areas for improvement, form conclusions and next steps, summarize your major findings, and make sure that you understand how you're going to measure your outcomes, and then develop that logic model. So what is a logic model? And many of us are very familiar with logic models now. And I know we have some great ones out there, but I always like to say, keep it simple, right? Keep it as simple as you can, as long as you have your goals and how you're going to use data to inform decisions. That's what we're really looking for. But it's really just a visual tool to link your needs, activities, and outcomes together. And helps plan, implement, and evaluate Title IV programs. And I know some other districts in here, once we started really pushing logic models, they saw the benefit and how it worked with Title IV and began to use the same method with other grants as well. But it is required within Title IV. So the components of a logic model, you have your inputs, and those would be your resources used. So your funds, your staff, materials, your activities, those would be the actions taken. So the trainings, the purchases, your outputs are those immediate deliverables, right? How many events held, how many devices bought. There's usually a number associated with those outputs. And then lastly, your outcomes, your short, medium, and long-term outcomes. So student access, engagement, and achievement. So like I said, keep it simple, align to the grant application, use those SMART outcomes. We like to see measurable goals, okay? Those relevant, time-bound, measurable SMART goals. And regularly review and update based on program evaluation. You might have the same goal for 3 years, but you need to track and reflect and analyze to determine if it's working. So an example logic model. So a problem statement deals with students out of high school who face high dropout rates and frequent discipline referrals. Many of these students struggle with academic performance, attendance, and behavioral issues. There's a lack of coordinated support systems and staff training to address these challenges. So this is something that is determined to be a problem within a school district. So based on that, here's an example logic model if you're planning to address these needs within Title IV. So first you have your inputs. Again, those are your resources used. So here it would be, of course, your Title IV funding, maybe some school counselors you're going to pay, behavior interventionists, maybe an attendance or academic tracking system, community mentors, PBIS training, and credit recovery resources. And that's what you're really focusing your Title IV funding on. That would be your inputs. And then activities, you want to train staff in PBIS, maybe launch a mentorship program, provide after-school tutoring, and credit recovery, and then maybe conduct early warning interventions for chronic absenteeism. So that's what your activities would be within your plan. So then your outputs are what you produce. So that would be the direct results of your activities, and it's usually countable, right? Tangible. So you're looking to have 100% of staff trained in PBIS, maybe 30 students is the goal, or paired with a mentor, weekly intervention team meetings, 50 students enrolled in credit recovery or tutoring. So those would be those things that you can attribute to a number. And then you set your goals, right? Your short-term outcomes, that's what you see immediately after implementing the activities. And then you have your long-term outcomes, those broader changes and results, and then how you're going to collect data and measure your outcomes. So here, what we're looking for when we see logic models, and if I'm your program manager, we've probably worked on setting measurable goals, but I want to see not just, reduce dropout rate. That doesn't really tell me much. I need to know, okay, well, what is your current dropout rate? And you want to reduce it by what percentage within, 2 years or 3 years? What is your goal? Something measurable, so then when you go to complete your Title IV survey, you can report if you met that goal because you have a measurable outcome, a measurable goal. Okay.
Okay, so the next page in GEMS is your public schools that are selected for intervention. So here we're looking to see what schools are being served. So at the top, you're telling me how you chose the schools that are being served. And then you're going to list for me what schools are benefiting from Title IV. And then if they just kind of meet any of these other categories, are they Title I, they have a severe need, are they ATSI, are they CSI? And then there may be a different reason why you're choosing to serve them. Or at the bottom, I can choose to target a population of students. So sometimes we see numbers there and that's not what we're looking for. What we're really looking for there is if you are targeting a specific population. Maybe you're targeting your high school dropouts, right? So, or your high school attendance, whatever you may be targeting, that's where you would list that category of students. And then just give us a description as to why you chose to target those students. All right, so then that brings us to our related documents. And there's several things that we look for. So the first one is your needs assessment / logic model. We're looking for both of those things. You must have a logic model uploaded within your Title IV. If you do not, we will send it back to you. In addition to that, we're looking for your stakeholder consultation information, and you upload that right into your plan. So it automatically transfers to your related documents. We're looking for documentation that helps you decide what schools you are serving. So how did you come to the conclusion that I need to serve these schools? And then we're looking for, if you have field trips built in, you would upload a template here. If you have PD built in, you would upload a template for that. And then of course that private school documentation that we've asked you to upload in all of the other ones would find its way into your related documents here as well.
Okay, so another requirement is to report outcomes as a state. So Title IV statute requires that state to publicly report on how funds are allocated to LEAs, how they're expended, including a summary of LEA progress toward meeting desired objectives and outcomes. So we have to report on that, so it's important that you are doing that front leg work within your logic model in determining your objectives and your outcomes so that we can properly report that. So the reporting on program outcomes is important not only just to meet the grant requirements, but to demonstrate the progress within Title IV, to provide accountability, informed decision-making, and influence public perceptions. You know, if something's working, you want to be able to show why you need it, and why you want to pay for it in your district. So, so the LEA, so what you have to do with your data reporting requirements, you'll report to us on how funds are being used to meet the distribution limits across 3 budgeted categories. You do that with gems and gaps. And Sarah is going to talk a little more in a few minutes about reporting in gaps, how important it is. You'll see in gaps that there is going to be, or there already is, and has been a drop-down menus. You have to go in there and select the content area and put the details in there. She'll talk a little more about that process in a few minutes. And outcomes data reporting requirements. So report to us the degree to which the district has made progress toward meeting objectives and outcomes annually. So that comes when we send out that survey. It's usually in December. I know y'all just did, felt like y'all just did 2024. So when 2025 closes, and we'll send out that survey in December. So it's important to make sure that you are reflecting back on your 25 logic model, looking at the data so that you are familiar with it and ready to report within that survey. And then we post all of the results publicly on our website.
Okay, and then lastly, if you're choosing to transfer your Title IV funds, then you may do so. You can transfer them to Title V if you were a recipient of Title V, Title III, Title II, Title I. If you are choosing to transfer them to Title V, your Title IV application is due well before you will get your Title V application. And so we tend to hold your application until we can guarantee that you are a recipient of Title V, because if for some reason you no longer qualify for Title V, which we'll talk about Title V in a second, then you can't transfer it. So there's just a disclosure there. So if you are choosing, again, our transfer form has changed. It is uploaded here in the application. And so you will just you'll tell us where you're transferring your money to, and then have your superintendent sign off on it, and then just upload it, and your related documents are right here on this page. You can choose to split transfer some of your funds. So if you want to transfer some of it to Title II and some of it to Title V, that's fine too. But like I said, just make sure that when final allocations come out, that you have updated your transfer forms to reflect that. So we just ask for you to tell us how much you're transferring of your allocation, and then a description of the activities that you will be doing with those funds.
Okay, and you know, we do encourage you to keep the money in Title IV. There are a lot of great things you can do with Title IV, with well-rounded, safe and healthy, and technology. We've seen, you know, fewer districts transferring, which we're happy to see. You know, more familiar and comfortable with Title IV, coming up with some really innovative ideas. You know, like I mentioned earlier with the esports team, and just some really cool things that we can spend funding on in Title IV, since it is so flexible. We can justify how it does fit a lot of different areas. So encourage you to keep it within Title IV, but of course, based on your district's needs, you do have that option to transfer. Any questions before we move in to N&D? Okay. If there's anyone in here who is new to Title IV and you would like to, you know, team up with another district, I have some great people who can serve as a mentor to discuss innovative ways to spend your Title IV dollars. So definitely reach out to me. And I'd be happy to connect you with a district who has some great ideas. Okay, thank you. Yes. Jennifer, did you hear that? Yeah. I can't hear Jennifer. She was asking about the EdFlex and flexibilities within the Title IV percentages.
One of the questions was, can we go back and like be retroactive if we've already submitted the grant, if we get this EdFlex waiver? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. If we can, I will ask if we can do that, but we'll see about the time frame of approval.
Great question. All right. Thank you, and definitely reach out to me if you have any needs or any questions.
Hey there. You guys' lunch was way better than my lunch was. I always laugh at people that slam their fingers in the car doors, trying to figure out how the heck did you do that? Well, I learned today during lunch how that happened. Yeah, so my thumb looks like a big toe right now. So just bear with me, I'm out there in pain problems. But, return on investment, that's what I'm presenting on today. And, after the return on investment segment, I do want to do a quick training on N&D, eligibility review that will be taking place in the fall. And I know that some of you are thinking, well, that doesn't apply to me. Well, it does. Because all districts have to reach out to facilities within their geographical area to see if those facilities would want to participate in the eligibility review. I know that we've done it a little bit differently in the past, but most of you are aware that we were audited last spring, and we normally reach out to facilities that were already on board with us, but all of our districts need to be making sure that the facilities that are within their geographical area are able to participate if they want to. But that comes at the end of the return on investment. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that that's going to be applicable to everyone. Now, return on investment, if you came to ESSA Academy and you attended the session with Martha, Leslie, and Anna, they presented on return on investment for title. It's going to be pretty much the same information because return on investment doesn't change, just a different program. Now we're just focusing on return on investment for N&D. So why use return on investment in federal programs? I want you to chit chat yet. Oh, sorry. All right, return on investment and what does it look like for N&D? Understanding the goal of N&D. Title I, Part D. All right, so return on investment analyzes and supports more strategic spending decisions by identifying programs with the strongest student outcomes. Evaluation data improves compliance and transparency and accountability for federal funding. Districts can use return on investment findings to revise programs and strengthen future implementation of efforts. Return on investment ensures funding priorities align with district and state goals, and sharing measurable outcomes helps build trust with stakeholders in the community. Now, the Title I Part D goals. If you have an N&D facility within your area, chit chat really quick, I'm gonna give 10 seconds. And don't look at the screen. See if you can tell your neighbor what's the goal of Title I Part D, no looking at this. What's the goal of Title I Part D? Neglected and delinquent. All right, so if you said to maintain and improve the educational achievement and graduate from high school in the number of years established by the state, either in the 4-year adjusted cohort or the extended year adjusted cohort graduation rate, you're right. That's one of the goals. Another goal is to accrue school credit that meet state requirements for grade promotion and high school promotion. In other words, guys, they want these students to have the same education as students within your school. They want them to be on graduation track, just like the students in your building. To complete high school or high school equivalency requirements and to obtain employment after leaving the correctional facility or institution for neglected or delinquent children and youth. As appropriate, participate in post-secondary education or job training. Not everyone may be on the track to go to college or technical school. So they want to make sure that those students are also prepared for the workforce if that's what they choose to do. Allow your data to drive your instruction and your needs. You want to effectively plan to meet your students and your facility's needs. You must use data, comprehensive needs assessment. You want to make sure that you're using your needs assessment and that it aligns with what it is that you're asking for when you submit your plans and GIMS. Because that's what I look at, and I know a needs assessment is new to NND. I want to say in the past 2 years, I've been asking for a needs assessment. That's not new to your other titles, but that is new to NND because I want to make sure what it is that you're asking for to cover within your budget that it correlates to your needs assessment. I want to make sure those are those things that your students in your facility needs. I want to make sure that it is student related, student focused, and it's going to move the needle to help those students achieve what it is that they need to achieve. Conducting needs assessments. There's various ways on how your facility can conduct needs assessments to ensure, again, that those needs assessments are correlating to the things that you're asking for in GIM. And I know that I've gone back and forth sometimes with some of my LEAs just saying that some of the things that are being requested within the budget doesn't really align to what's in the needs assessment. So make sure when your facilities are telling you, well, this is what we want to cover, this is what we want to, this is what we want, make sure it aligns with what is in that needs assessment, or I won't be able to deem it as allowed. Strategic planning. Title I Part D plan should remain flexible and responsive to changing student needs. Every proposed expenditure should demonstrate a direct connection to student outcomes. Transition planning should be treated as core strategy rather than a secondary support. Dedicated staff such as transition coordinators or instructional strategists can strengthen implementation. All right, so your return on investment and what does it look like? That's the slide I started with. So I've already read that slide. But that's what return on investment looks like within federal programs. Your framework and data sources for evaluation. Again, there's several data sources that you can use for evaluation. Here's your step one. You have input, activity, output, outcome, and your return on investment. Here's what I think of when I think of return on investment. I felt I got cheated, and I'm talking about my own kids. My daughter, from middle school all the way through high school, cheer team. She was on the middle school cheer team. Got to high school, of course, she still wanted to cheer. We know with high school, most of the high schools here in Richland 2, or even Richland 1 does competition cheer. Along with competition cheer comes a hefty bill and a lot of extra tumbling classes and all the extra things that come along with it. I live in Blythewood, so she went to Blythewood High School. They required their girls that participated on the tumbling, what am I trying to say? I'm losing my train of thought, my thumb hurts. So the cheer team, not the team, but the competition team, to take extra tumbling classes. Class about in Valentine Day. I live in Blackwood and they had to do it once a week. So anyway, drove her out once a week Valentine. Okay, she's gonna do this, she's gonna get her a scholarship when she goes to college. So I'm investing I'm investing in this because it's going to help cover that tuition. She applied to several colleges. Got accepted to all that she applied for. She chose in Winthrop. Winthrop is this excellent school. And I'm like, they don't have a cheer team. They don't have a cheer team. When am I going to get a return on my investment here? How am I going to get a return on my investment? Same thing. Basketball, also middle school basketball, and that's high school. I don't want to do basketball anymore, Mom. So I'm glad that he chose before we went through all 4 years of high school and he investing more money. He decided after 8th grade he was done. So I didn't feel as cheated there for return on investment, but the same thing when you're looking at your federal program size. You want a return on your investment. You want to make sure that what you're putting out, you're going to get back 10 times fold. And you're getting back those students. They're moving the needle. They're graduating. They're going off to college or some workforce. They're doing something productive. They're becoming productive citizens. That's your return on investment. That's your return. Sample questions for a return on investment. What outcomes did the program achieve? You want to evaluate that. You want to think about those things. If your program is not achieving the things that you set out for it to achieve, you might want to do something a little bit differently. I'm not going to read all of these questions, but those are questions that you should be asking yourself, or your facility should be asking themselves each year that they sit down to plan. What do we need? What do we need to help these kids move forward? Those are the questions that they should be asking as they're planning, and not doing a copy and paste from year to year. Because what worked last year may not work this year. All right, your ROI evaluation cycle. Here's the cycle. You want to identify priorities and set goals. That's your first step. You want to determine what is your priority and you want to set your goals. And there's an example there. A facility prioritizes improving reading proficiency, aiming to increase it by 15% in 1 year. That's just an example. They determined what their priority was, and then they set their goal. Plan and budget with return investment in mind. I'm going to plan for something, I'm going to invest in it, and I want to see the outcome of it. That's return on investment. Implement programs and track your costs. Whatever it is that you plan for, now it's time for implementation. And I also want to track how much am I putting towards this? Because at the end, I'm going to see if the return on my investment was good, if it was a good investment. Sometimes it isn't, sometimes it is. If it isn't, then we need to go back to the drawing board and figure out something else to do. Because we're not going to keep pouring into something that's not returning on our investment. Evaluation and practice. Evaluation science can justify continuing investments in academics, behavioral, or transition initiatives. Professional development efforts should be reviewed regularly to ensure meaningful impact on student performance. I want to pause on the professional development piece. And I say that because if you look at the allowable use of guidance for N&D, there is no PD on here. There is no professional development on your allowable use of funds document for N&D. Now, I'm not saying professional development is not allowed. It's allowed on a case-by-case basis. And when I say that, I mean, I look at your allocation that your facility received. I look at your needs assessment. I look at the percentage that you're trying to put towards professional development, because all of your funds should go towards direct impact on student achievement. Now, professional development does have impact on student achievement, but it's not a direct impact. So I do look at all those things when you request PD. I had a facility once that requested 80% of their allocations to go to PD. Now, you know that was a no for me. It was a firm no for me. I normally look at maybe 10 to 15%, no more, to go towards PPD. And I want the majority of your allocation going towards direct impact on student achievement. So that's why sometimes when you put PD in your plan, I do the calculations, I look at the percentage, and I want to see how many students it's going to impact. And it might be a no. We might go back and forth in conversations for a little bit with it, but again, we have to look at reasonableness too. And if it's not reasonable, it's going to be a no from me. Funding should prioritize programs and purchase that provide the greatest benefit and reach the largest number of students. Clear results should help understand how resources improve student well-being and achievement. Implications for return on investment. And again, these are more examples. I'll just read a header. Inform smarter spending decisions. I'll read that first example. If a summer school reading program costs $80,000 and raises reading score 15% participants, but a tutoring program costs $50,000 and raises scores 40%, the district may shift to which model? The tutoring model, because it yields greater benefits. It yields greater benefits. It's a bigger return on their investment. Improves compliance and transparency. It supports continuous improvement. It aligns program goals, and it builds stakeholder confidence. When sharing return on investment results with stakeholders, partners in the community, leaders can show not just how money was spent, but how it directly improved the performance and well-being. All right, so red flags. There's always red flags with everything. There's red flags with everything. High cost initiatives that serve only a small number of students. That's not the best bang for your buck. Outcome claims that lack evidence or measurable indicators. How can you measure that this was productive or a great return on your investment if there's no measurable outcome? Spending requests not directly connected to identify students' needs. One-time purchase without sustainability or implementation plans. Duplicating resource already available within the district or facility. Key question: will this investment significantly improve educational or transitional outcomes? Those are the things that you want to ask yourself. Progress monitoring. Of course you have to monitor your program. That's the only way you're going to see if there's improvement or lack thereof. Strong implementation fidelity is essential before evaluating program impact. Low performance may indicate implementation issues rather than effective strategy. Programs should monitor whether students are actively using instructional support as intended, and quarterly or a 90-day review helps identify concerns early and allow for timely adjustments. Success measures should clearly define what positive student outcomes look like. All right, resources. Again, Leslie, Martha, and Anna shared this with you if you went to the Title I back in ESSA Academy, so you may already have this. For those of you that don't, I attached it there for you. All right, eligibility review training. Now this is the fun part. Why is an eligibility review required? Okay, so according to the U.S. Department of Ed, an eligibility review is to be conducted annually. Now that's something we have not been doing in the past, but that's something that we are doing going forward. Every fall, well, late August, I'll be conducting an eligibility review. And that's for all districts. All districts have to participate. All districts do have to push it out to facilities within their geographical area. Now, do those facilities have to participate? Absolutely not, but you have to offer them the opportunity to. And send that paperwork to me for me to conduct the evaluation to see if they're even eligible. They may not even be eligible, but it has to be offered to them because they can complain that we weren't given that opportunity. So that's why we are conducting an eligibility review annually going forward. Receiving funding 1 year does not guarantee that you will receive funding the next year, especially if your population served and the primary purpose of who you serve has changed. I know when I did the eligibility review back last fall, there were several facilities that fell off because they did not meet eligibility requirements, but they have been receiving funding from us for quite some time. But again, we haven't done an eligibility review in a minute to determine that those facilities have changed over time. So that's why we have to do it annually going forward. All right, so DSS and DHEC residential facilities list. This is what you're going to be receiving from me. I have to request it from DSS, my personal contact there. They send it to me, I'll push it out to you. Once you get this list, and I have a copy of 25, I'm waiting on the 26 copy from DSS. This is what it looks like. The document is 18 pages with about 5 facilities per page, and it covers the entire state of South Carolina. So once you get it from me, and again, this is 25, this is not the 26 one, you have to go through this, determine which facility falls within your geographical area. You will be given an eligibility review form that I'll push out along with this. You send it out to your facilities that are in your geographical area, letting them know that they are eligible to complete the form. And then I'll make the determination on if they're eligible or not by standards. And then get that back to me. All right, so SCDE receives an updated residential facilities list annually from both DSS and DHEC. That list is shared with LEAs across the state to determine facilities within their geographical boundaries. Once you have determined which facilities are within your geographical boundary, you are to make contact with each facility and inform them that they are eligible to complete the eligibility form. Please also advise that completing the form does not guarantee funding. There are also requirements that must be met. All right, so the requirements, and this is just some, these are the main ones. Must be a 24-hour residential facility, must serve children ages 5 to 17. Facility must operate, and I bolded some of the words, primarily, for the care of children who are abandoned, neglected, or who are committed because of the death of a parent or guardian. I highlighted the word primarily because that was one of the words that we struggled with last year during the eligibility review. That word primary means that is your primary operating purpose. Can you take in other children that are not neglected or delinquent? Absolutely. But in order for you to receive Title I Part D funding, that has to be your primary operating purpose. And how to determine primary operating purpose? 50% or more of your student population has to be sent there because of reasons of neglect or delinquency. That's how we determine primary operating purpose. And a lot of my facilities last year didn't get that was not their primary operating purpose. Yes, they took in students that were neglected and delinquent, a couple sprinkled here and there, but that was not their primary operating purpose. Yes. How old are they?
18, I think.
It's up to 18. They won't receive funding for them, but that student is able to stay within the facility. Yes, they won't qualify anymore for funding. I think I stopped that. Or operates primarily for the care of children who have been adjudicated by the proper state or local authorities to be delinquent or in need of supervision. This one too, a lot of my facilities, when they fall in need of supervision, they automatically assume that the in need of supervision could be, say for example, I have a son and I have a troubled son and he's not listening to me at home. And I want to find a facility to put him in because I'm saying that he needs supervision because I can't give him the supervision that he needs to get right. And I place him in this facility. That doesn't qualify as in need of supervision. That has to be court order that they need supervision. That has to be court order as well as adjudicated. That's also court order. So a couple of my facilities had students that were in need of supervision according to their parents. And so they were receiving funding from us. But when I did the eligibility review and realized that those were parent placement, and not court-ordered supervision, they didn't qualify anymore. And we kind of went back and forth on the verbiage of in need of supervision, and I had to send supplemental documents that said it was court order. So just make sure that in need of supervision, that we all understand that that's court ordered and not a parent saying, I need my student or my child to be placed here for supervisional purposes. All right, neglected facilities. 50% of the student population must be placed by a state agency such as DSS or placed by court order for delinquency or in need of supervision. Delinquent facilities, 50% of the student population must be placed by court order within the determination of delinquency or in need of supervision. That's a copy of the eligibility form, and I do have it hyperlinked there for those of you that already have the PowerPoint. So you already have the form, but I'm still going to email it out to everybody along with that list once I get it from DSS and DTEC. All right, timeline. The DSS and DTEC list will be sent out via email I hope to have it. Again, I don't have it yet. As soon as I get it, I'm anticipating having it by the last week of July. So as soon as I get it, it'll be within your email, along with the eligibility review form. Please share the eligibility review form with your facilities within your geographical area. Please return those completed forms to me. My email address is there by August 10th. So if I have it by the last week of July, or if I get, as soon as I get it, I'm pushing it out. Now, if I have to adjust that August 10th deadline, if I get it later than I'm anticipating, I'll adjust that date. And that new due date will be within the body of your email that I'll send out. But I'm hoping I'll get it soon. Please keep a record of your contact with each facility, especially if they decline to complete the eligibility review form. And I want you to keep that just in case because some facilities reach out to me directly. They don't even come to you guys. They'll reach out to me directly and say, hey, why were we informed that I could get, these funding? So just make sure if you reach out to them and they don't respond or they decline, that you keep that on your record, just in case I have to come back and ask you, hey, did you reach out to facility XYZ and let them know that they were able to complete the eligibility review form? That just covers you. A letter will be provided to LEAs to share with your facilities regarding eligibility. Now, last year when I did it, it was my first time doing it. I think I picked up the phone and called all LEAs and gave you guys your results. This year, I'll make sure that I have a template, a letter that you can send out to your facilities and letting them know that either they did qualify or they did. And if they didn't, I'll have lists of reasons as to why they did not qualify. All right, that's it. Question for me? Question? Hey, Reed. Go sit back down and nurse my thumb.
All right, let's finish it out. Not every district receives REAP, so we will soon find out which districts are recipients of REAP. And I say that because that actually is not determined on our level. This is the only grant that the U.S. Department of Ed decides who gets REAP. So we'll talk about how that is, but we actually receive a notification that will come down and it will be a master eligibility spreadsheet, and then it'll say yes and no, and it'll list the districts that are eligible to get that grant. We say REAP, but REAP is actually composed of two different grants. One is called RLIS and one is called SRSA. South Carolina is an RLIS state. And we'll take a look at that in just a minute. So whenever I say an overview of REAP, it's actually two different grants underneath that term. So what is the purpose of it? The purpose of Title V is to address the unique needs of rural school districts that frequently lack the personnel and resources needed to compete effectively for federal competitive grants and who receive formula grant allocations in too small amounts to be effective in meeting their intended purposes. So this actually will go out to what is determined as like rural school districts. This grant is very, very flexible. It actually will allow you to use its funds under Title I, II, III, IV, and parent involvement. Very, very flexible. The South Carolina Department of Education is the pass-through entity for this grant, so we will receive the information and then we just pass it right on through to you as the district. We just get the notification that you're the receiver and this is how much you get. Okay, and here we are, SRSA and RLIS. SRSA is the Small Rural School Achievement Program, and RLIS is the Rural and Low Income School Program. And as I said, we administer RLIS. Okay, what makes a district eligible for RLIS is really based on locale code. All right, so you'll see here to be considered rural, all school comprising the LEA must have a school locale code of 32, 33, 41, 42, or 43, or be located in an area of the state defined as rural by a government agency of the state. So a lot of it is based upon locale code. Now, it is also influenced by Title II and Title IV, and you'll see that in just a moment. We have to send in information on how much each of those districts get out of Title II and out of Title IV, and they take that information and then determine how much RLIS funding that district will receive. Within the REAP or RLIS application, it's in GEMS as well. If you are new and have never seen it, it's in GEMS just like the rest of them. We do ask that a needs assessment be conducted for it, but what is interesting is it is often used as just an extension of, let's say, Title I, or an extension of Title II, or I might do some Title I and Title IV activities. It can kind of be split. But you do have to determine what the needs are, just like the rest of the grants. Drop in a needs assessment into the related documents section and submit it that way so that we can take a look at that document and compare what has been put within that grant to the needs of also the other titles that you're submitting. And this gives you an example of what GEMS look like. For REAP, this is the program details link. And so this is what I was mentioning about which other grant allowability are we looking at for the RLIS. So you would say if you wanted to take on Title I allowability, you fill out the first box. And you put your activity that goes in the budget, you'd also put it there. So it's scripted in two areas. So upon looking at it, the reader on our end would be like, okay, let me put on my Title I allowability hat for a minute and read this activity, see how much is budgeted for it, look at the needs assessment, and see if we're good to go. But they would do the same thing for Title IV. If there was something in Title III, I will be honest, my team does not do Title III. So sometimes we have to consult another team to say, okay, does this look like an allowable expense for Title III? Because REAP is like an extension of what that grant is already doing. So you would fill out those little boxes with a narrative of activities and budget your funds. You see program details links in some of the other grants too. It's almost like a quick guide, if you will, before we deep dive way down in that budget. Kind of like a contents page, if you will. Just give me like an overview sort of thing. Okay, this grant also requires evaluation. They all do. We do send out a REAP survey to those that receive that grant, just to kind of say like, How are you doing with this grant? Is it effective, or how are you able to meet your goals by using this funding? And as I said, a lot of times it goes back to the other grants. If you've taken on Title I allowability, well, how is Title I working for you as far as your goal setting is concerned? So you do have to evaluate it annually, even though it's open for 2 years. We evaluate at the end of the first year. That comes into us so that we can take a look, because the U.S. Department of Ed asked us about this grant as well. Excuse me, we turn in CSPR data on the REAP grant as well to the U.S. Department of Ed.
We get that.
All right, this grant holds to the old supplement, not supplant. So you'll keep that in mind, but as I said, if it's an extension of, the same thing carries over, right? So if it's a Title II activity, you have to think of, are we doing something that comes on top of, but we should already be taken care of? It's that old supplement, not supplant methodology. That bullet, that second bullet explains that the LEA may not use Title V funds to pay for activities that, in the absence of these funds, would be provided with state and local funds. Allowable use of funds. Activities are authorized under these grants, along with parent involvement. That's what you saw on that program detail page. You can use it for any of that, allowability there. And this describes the allocation process for this particular grant. So if you're just curious about, well, how does that work out? What does that look like? In November of each year, U.S. Department of Ed provides us with an initial eligibility spreadsheet. Got up a long time ago. Extra makeup for y'all this week. Oh, goodness. They give us an initial eligibility spreadsheet that we have to complete and send back to them. That happens in November. We complete the spreadsheet by providing information about Title II and Title IV allocations. As I said, they use that information. We also provide them an average daily attendance for each district. We give them 2 contacts for each district, and then we submit it to them. And then later on, whenever they finish up deciding who meets that eligibility requirement, they send us a master spreadsheet, and it'll just have a list of who's going to get it for that year. That being the case, I have briefly looked over it for 27. Yes, it is already here. I am impressed with them this go round. So you will be getting a phone call from me if you were receiving it and will not be receiving it in 27, or if you did not get it in 26, but you're going to get it in 27. I will call you ahead of time, because I need for you to have time to plan, to decide how you want to utilize the grant. If you happen to be a recipient, for the first time, we probably need to talk through how that works and all the logistics of that, and provide you some technical assistance. So if that applies to you either way, I'll give you a phone call. When we talk about transferability, because the grant is so flexible, a lot of times people will say, whoa, I just want to move my money up there into REAP. Okay, you cannot transfer into REAP until you know that you're a REAP recipient. Okay, so what would that look like? It just needs to hold until final allocation time, when we send out final allocations in that email, and we will have the attachment of Title I, II, IV, V, and N and D. You open up that Title V pretty sheet, take a look down through there and be like, oh, okay, I am going to get REAP this year. And if that is the case, then you can move along with your transferability. Okay, if you want to do some transfer at that point. Okay, you can transfer into several of the grants. Remember that this one is open for 2 years, just like the others. You can transfer at any point during that 27th month period of availability. But I do like for you to let me know ahead of time that you're going to do that. And you'll be doing so by putting that transfer form into the related documents and sending it to your program manager. And these are the action steps for that. I really went into this earlier about transferring funds. So here it is scripted for REAP. It says the same thing as the other grants. You have to pull all the stakeholders together, just like you do for Title II or whatever. You have to tell them about your intent to transfer. Private schools have to be able to sign off or give the nod that they're okay with it as well. You have to notify us, drop it in about 30 days before the effective date on the transfer form, send it in through GEMS so that we can take a look at it. And you say, well, you're not really approving it like you did in the past. No, but once that program manager and director get approved in GEMS, it's good to go. Okay, so just drop it into that related documents section. Okay. For REAP, if you are new to REAP or if you need technical assistance about REAP, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I'll give you the first go round of technical assistance, and then after that, send you to a program manager for further instruction, but we're happy to help you out, especially if you're new to that grant. All right, Sarah's going to talk for a few minutes about GAPS. How many of you are GAPS users? Okay, hands down. How many of you have a friend in finance that does all of GAPS? Okay. All right, so for the most of you, y'all need to listen up now. Roles and GAPS.
I'm terrified of public speaking, so I was hoping the lights would go out again, but they didn't. There are 3 roles that you can have in GAPS. It's the grants coordinator, the subrecipient finance approver, the grant accountant finance approver. The grant coordinator is actually the one that enters the budget and any budget amendment. And the subrecipient finance person approves the budget and also enters the expenditures. The grants accountant finance approver is the one that approves the expenditures. 2 people may be assigned each role within a single grant. However, only one person can hold a role for each grant. This is just kind of an overview of how that budget process happens. So with the budget, we've got the grants coordinator that enters the budget, and the grant subrecipient finance person that approves it, and then the SCDA program office, which is us. Once, we'll go ahead and approve it once you get it into it. And just note that expenditures can't be entered until the final budget has been entered. And this is the payment process. So expenditures need to be entered by that grant subrecipient finance role. And you have the grant accounting finance approver role that approves it. Then we go to the grants accounting finance office, which is for the state. Okay, some useful budget reports. We've got the budget summary, which is that high level report. We've got the allocations and the expenditures, and then your net budget balance. This is that overview. And we have the budget detail report, which is shows your budget balance, and then it has it by line item. So every function object code is listed there. And then your budget versus actual report, which will show pending items. And your expenditure reports, you've got the expenditure summary, which is that high level report, then the expenditure details, and then you've got the expenditure refund details. So if you enter an expenditure that you didn't mean to, you can go through the process of doing an expenditure refund, and that report will show you where you are in that process. You can sort by clicking on the column heading. And also these reports can be imported into Excel. Okay, Jennifer actually already went through this, but I thought I'd just reiterate it. Grants accounting now no longer gives you 45 days. Only have 30 days to submit your expenditure. So although fourth quarter, you still have until August 15th. So August 15th is still that hard stop in gaps. You just want to make sure that you're meeting those deadlines, and so for not to affect your risk assessment. Yeah.
So I understand the hard date on August 15th. What if there was an expenditure in second quarter and they forgot to claim it? Can it get claimed in third quarter or no?
So you probably still want to claim it in the second quarter. Unfortunately, it will hit that risk assessment though. Yeah, you can. The only thing that you can't do is after the fiscal year ends, you can no longer enter any expenditures for that fiscal year. Troubleshooting through gaps, there's just a couple of things I've seen. We have given out additional funding recently, and I've noticed that some people might try to submit expenditures prior to the entire budget being approved. So you just have to have your budget approved prior to submitting any expenditures. Also, at the end of the fiscal year, it probably be good practice to go ahead and run that budget detail report to make sure everything is submitted to the program office.
Okay, so let's play this out. What if we don't get approval until after first quarter's claim period is over?
Gotcha. So approval with the state? Or,
Like say approval in gens and gaps.
yeah, we're supposed to have that approval in two
Oh,
prior.
no, but it happened with 21st Century Funds this year. That's what I'm saying. So like, we couldn't claim first quarter expenses by the deadline because we didn't have.
Yeah, I will say this, with grants accounting, I did work in grants accounting, and they do pull the budget to make sure that the budget has been approved. That it won't ding you if it hasn't been approved.
Okay. Yeah, because all quarter 1 and 2 expenditures went in quarter 2.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, that wasn't. Budget decrease in gaps, hopefully this will not happen to any of you, but the 50% has to be hit for Title I. If it's not, then we have to go into gaps and create a budget decrease, unfortunately, and then that little button besides the right of it is where you do your budget decrease. You just enter, the reason for the decrease. Just note that what is allotted there in the budget is actually what takes into account your expenditures. Okay, and then Martha briefly touched on this, Title IV. I have to use CSVR data, and it'd be fabulous if everybody could click on one of those content areas. Okay, and they don't, unfortunately, it's not actually a requirement. You can enter the expenditure without moving forward, but I would love it if you could do that. That would save me so much time. And finally, the indirect cost rates, you guys know that they're entered every year. GEMS, unfortunately, right now doesn't track expenditure, so the indirect cost rate isn't going to show up how it should for the second year. You guys are going to have to calculate that on your own. If you need help with that, you can reach out to me. And then the indirect cost rates can be found at this link. And they got
Come on. How many of you have somebody else that enters the claims for Title IV? Raise your hand. You have somebody else. Please get your pen ready to take a note, to go back and talk with them. If that is not you. If it is you, you better write a note for yourself. Last year, and I think it was the year before, the GAP system would not allow a claim to be submitted unless you clicked in the drop-down link and said which content area the claim was coming from. Sarah is much nicer in her approach. She says, "Look, I would love for you to put on the drop." I'm telling y'all, I need for you to say what content area it's coming from, because now the system will let you submit without you clicking. Okay? But We cannot get it on our side to stop the submission. So when I go in and look, right now, it is not being tagged for Title IV. And I'm talking about 26 Title IV, 25 Title IV, and the upcoming 27 Title IV. I have to know which content area the claim is coming from, because I have to report it to the U.S. Department of Ed. So I will tell you that I have seen Florida's way of asking their LEAs to report it back. We don't want to have to go to the extent of what other states are doing. It is much easier to put a note on the computer, click the content area, so that we're not going back into previous years, into finances and trying to track that. That is not a way that is not a practice I want to participate in. So please click the content area you're claiming from, so that GAPS will run a report for us and it'll spit it out. This is how much is being claimed for well-rounded. This is how much the state is claiming for safe and healthy. And then I can just send it on to DC, okay? So I would love for it to stop the transaction, but for some reason, moving into this year, that feature went away and it has not been able to be employed. So we checked before this just to see, like, if it was being done, and it's not being done. So this is my ask request, so that we go this easier route rather than trying to be retroactive later on. Okay, questions? Yes, if you transfer, you don't have to worry about that. Yeah, I have what I need for, yes, for transfer. This is for those folks that are actually claiming in those real 3 content areas. Finance, if they're doing the claim, they're not gonna know what content area it is. Program will have to tell them. You can just simply put WR or click the drop down and just click it, either way. But whoever's making those claims, just please let them know which area it's coming from so we can pull a report. Okay, Pamela. There is an issue. How about after today, I'm going to reach out to you if I don't see it being done. Okay, since you are here and you can talk to whoever's doing that for you. If not,
It can be us, because there's the grant, the person that puts in the budget, the amendments can't be the same person that puts in the claims, right?
I don't,
But that's a little picture is, so.
that,
I'm finally wrapping my head around it. This is your 3, so.
you put in the budget, you're not the ones that can submit the claims.
Correct.
Okay. All right, so quiz time. When does Jim's amendments need to be submitted by? At the latest when? August 3rd, please. Please don't do August 4th. Somebody will do it. Please try to do it prior to August 4th, so I can be sure that I can get gaps handled on August 4th. Okay? Uh-huh. The August 4th does. Yes, Jim's, I don't know. I can't speak for them, but I would imagine it would be the same. Yes, the August 4th deadline is set up by Grants Accounting. It is not Office of Federal and State Accountability. We wait on finance to tell us when they're going to cut that off. Which date does the system shut completely down? August 15th. Yes. No grace on that date. Okay, all right, any questions about anything we've discussed? For our team or the monitoring team? Okay. We're going to send you a survey, probably next week on coordinators training. I would like for you to be honest. We look at the feedback. We want your time, it to be worth your time and your drive. A lot of you are driving a long way, so if you have tips for us or suggestions that can make it better, other than the power flipping off, please feel free to let us know. Now, yesterday I promised you were going to get out early, and you were a little bit. But I'm going to make it up for you today after Anna has an announcement. And then if you are a part of COP, if you can stay behind and just come up to this front table, I won't keep you but about 5 minutes today, and then I'm going to dismiss. Anna?
Monday, registration will go live. We have people join us. That's if you were new or haven't been to Seattle, we would love to see you in October. That's really kind of one of our checkpoints. We got this from the State Department in the summer, and then we have S Academy in March, and we get together in October at Plantation. And so we're looking forward to that. Y'all just be patient with us. Y'all know you're in federal funds, right? We gotta wait till the rollover happens and we get the, all the things for FUBA and all that stuff. So we'll be live Monday and we can y'all.
If you need to stay behind, this room is open until 4 o'clock. Please make sure that you have signed in so that you can get your credit renewal. I want to thank Eric Brunson for helping me with the technology. And I also want to thank my team, the super team back there. They've done an amazing job the last couple of days. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Have a safe trip home.